The Memphis Grizzlies. I don't know about you, Geoff, but this, in my opinion, is the clear winner of the most underrated team in the NBA right now. They are just kind of scary. And I think for a few reasons that aren't really being taken into account by a lot of people. We should dive right in to one of the main reasons that we both wanted to talk about a bunch is Jaren Jackson Jr. and his incredible bounce back season. I think people kind of wrote Jaren Jackson off after his FIBA World Cup performance and how he played for most of last year. Did we forget that this player just turned 25 years old? He's still adding to his game, and he's gotten so much better. I've always fallen on the side of, he needs to shoot threes at a decent level because he's not a full-time five with his well-advertised struggles rebounding, which I do think and I've always thought has been pretty overblown. But he's shot well enough this season, and also the return of Brandon Clark and how Santi Aldama have played has made this a complete non-issue. On top of that, this guy, and you and I just talked about this before we started the pod, this guy is the best floater range player in the NBA. I don't think people realize that. He gets to the short mid-range or kind of just outside of that rim area, and it's floater, hook shot, left hand, right hand, complete ambidextrous. He gets there off of drives, off of pick and rolls, plays where he just cuts to the basket, off of isolations even. Like if they don't have any options, it's getting late in the shot clock, give it to Jaren, clear out. He'll kind of back his way close to the rim, and he'll just make a floater or hook shot over anyone. He makes it every time. I don't know how he suddenly has the touch of like a Luka Doncic or Nikola Jokic near the basket. He was getting really good at these shots last year, but now he has complete confidence and he doesn't miss them. So, there's a ton to talk about with Jaren, but the guy has just been ridiculous overall. I know you had stuff you wanted to touch on with him too.
They were running the offense through him against Boston. This was Boston had its whole starting lineup. And they didn't have Horford, and I think Horford matters, but they had all five starters. And Ja Morant was on the bench, and it was a close game in Boston, and they were clearing out for Jaren Jackson Jr., and he was getting short mid-range shots for himself. Brian Scalabrine was losing his mind. How does this guy keep making lefty floaters? It's crazy. He has the lowest percentage of assisted baskets of his entire career, 22nd percentile in the entire NBA. He has assisted that few. He is self-creating 78% of his baskets. That's absolutely wild. That's for Jaren Jackson. That's not what you think. And if you look at the shooting splits, you see the mid-range attempts jump out, and you see the rim attempts are way down. They're down from 7.5 per 75 possessions to 4.8 per 75 possessions. That might worry some analytically minded folks. It worried me. And so I went over to Shot Creator and I was like, well, it doesn't seem like Jaren Jackson is this mid-range merchant. So I'm so glad you brought up the floater range, because that's exactly, he's trading off some rim attempts for just some short mid-range. And he's really good at this. As long as he's really good at those, it's a fine trade-off. He's been a revelation offensively. This is the best offensive season of his career by far. And, a few years ago, if you had said Jaren Jackson Jr. had the best offensive season of his career by far, I would have just been like, oh, so he's a stretch 4 or stretch 5 and he shot hot. But no, the 3-point shooting is good, but it's the same as it's always been. I think we can bet on him maintaining this level of 7 threes per 75 and shooting 35%. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think he could shoot better over stretches. I think he could shoot worse over stretches, but I think this is a pretty reasonable plateau for him. And he's still, in the 91st percentile on offensive EPM. So this is a guy who is doing it pretty much from 3 levels. If you count the short mid-range as, the second level, he's self-creating shots. He's been a huge part. And the thing I want to say about Jaren Jackson that is so important that, look, XJ and I, this is how we think about basketball. Maybe this isn't how you think about basketball, but this is definitely how we view team construction. The appeal of Jaren Jackson Jr., more so even than Ja Morant on this team, is that when you combine his rim protection and his quickness, his defensive instincts, with that type of shooting, with that type of offensive impact at the power forward position, and he can play center, his versatility just opens up so many doors for Memphis. It's so important to this team because we're going to get into it in a bit. They have all this depth. They can go small, they can go big, they can play fast, they can play slow. No matter what they do, no matter what style they try to play, Jaren Jackson Jr. almost ensures that they have some modicum of rim protection, defense, and shooting on the floor at all times. And so they can kind of match up with anybody. And this allows them to go and get any type of free agents that they think will fit this system. It doesn't hinder them or handcuff them in any way. They can get anybody. And we're seeing that this year. We're seeing that this year with their depth. We're seeing that with Santi Aldama, with Jake LaRavia. Jay Huff is shooting 42% from three and is in the 96th percentile in block percentage. They have a center just out of nowhere. And they can do that because partially, of course, anybody would want that at center. I'm not saying that only Memphis could make this work, but Jaren Jackson Jr. elevates these players with his versatility.
Yeah, that's so well said. Specifically to Jaren Jackson's versatility, it just allows you to do anything and surround him with any great, really strong players that you'd like, and they'll really thrive. And like you said, we're seeing that. They don't have and haven't had for effectively the entire year Vince Williams Jr., who has showed so much promise last year, hasn't really played yet at all, and GG Jackson too. They'll both probably get them back in 2025. Guess what? I have a guess that they'll fit in just fine because, like you said, Jake LaRavia is in there doing an amazing job. He's filling that role, being incredible for them off the bench. Luke Kennard's horrible defensively, but he's still doing his thing. He's shooting 40% from three, and that's his worst percentage in 5 years. So, I think he's able to play because when you play next to a guy like Jaren Jackson Jr., who's going to protect the rim at an elite level, whether at the 4 or at the 5, that allows you to play a guy who's not the best in terms of guarding the ball or stopping guys on the perimeter. That versatility is so important. You mentioned about the Grizzlies playing fast or playing slow. They can definitely do both, but what they want to do is play fast, and that's why I really like them. I started out the season not watching a ton of Grizzlies games, but then of late, I've just been kind of spamming Grizzlies games because they're so freaking exciting. They love running. They are first in percentage of shots that come in transition in the entire league. They are third overall in pace. It's a weird system in that it's almost like the guards are the only ones who touch the ball aside from shooting. So Ja, Scottie Pippen Jr., Smart, Bane, Jaren off of defensive rebounds does this, but basically if you're one of those guys, when you get the ball, you just go, you run. Everybody else spread the floor or dive to the basket, and it gets them really high quality looks in transition. Something that's really cool to me that stood out, and it's tied into what you were saying about Jaren Jackson kind of taking these short mid-range shots as opposed to taking shots at the rim. Their shot diet, they had the highest frequency of short shots in the short mid-range, and they also have the second lowest percentage of their shots coming from the long mid-range. So this is still a super disciplined team about where their shots are coming from. It's not like they're taking these low percentage mid-range shots. They're getting really high quality shots. You have Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., two of the best floater shooters in the entire league. Yeah, it's okay for you to take a ton of short mid-range shots that are coming from like 8 feet from the basket or even closer sometimes. But to me, the primary thing is they fly up the court, and yeah, they secure offensive rebounds. That's always been a key part of their identity with Steven Adams, obviously. And now Zach Edey, whenever he plays, is an absolute nightmare on the offensive boards, but it's about the pace. It's about the speed off of live rebounds. They fly up the court. And Ja Morant, we were just talking about Trae Young in another episode. Ja Morant is the only one who's probably pushing Trae Young for as heliocentric a creator, a shot creator, and passer. The guy, in terms of his metrics, passing versatility is 98th percentile, passing creation volume, which is how much he's passing, 99th percentile, passing creation quality, 100th percentile, is the best, creates the best looks for teammates of anybody in the entire National Basketball Association, and lob passing creation rate, also 100th percentile. This is like one of the best passers in the league, and he does not get credit for this, I don't think, on a regular basis, maybe by some analytics people, but this guy is creating offense, and the team around him is just finishing everything. They've put together such a well-constructed team that they're so fun to watch.
The Memphis Grizzlies, XJ, are shooting 44% of their shots in the first 8 seconds of the shot clock.
That's sick.
44%.
That's
The
sick.
Boston Celtics, an elite offense in their own right, 30%. The Knicks, the number one offense in the NBA, 34%. The Mike D'Antoni 2016-2017 Houston Rockets, who, yes, they had James Harden, who was methodical at the end of shot clock when play broke down. I promise you, D'Antoni still wanted them to play fast. It's Mike D'Antoni. 43%. The Memphis Grizzlies are playing faster than anybody in the NBA, and nobody's talking about it.
It's great. Like, how is this not being talked about? They're like, if this was, I don't know, if this was a team with like Chris Paul, like a prime Chris Paul or a prime Steve Nash, and they were playing this style, like they would be getting talked up like crazy. But Ja Morant is playing in that style, and obviously we know what he can do with like highlight dunks and like his finishes, but his shooting hasn't been there. You know, like I don't.
I have the same note. I have the same exact note.
What's that?
Career high offensive EPM, and he hasn't even been good at putting the ball in the basket.
I just think it's crazy how they've like leveraged his gift as a passer and his court vision, and it's so weird that is not talked. Like if I talked about the fact that he's been effectively a better and more high volume passer than Trae Young, than Luka Doncic, like no one would even believe that. Like you can go double check these numbers, no one would believe that, but it's just true, and it's really crazy. I just don't even know why it's not on people's radar. But I will say this. The reason why I think they're so scary is because I'm a huge Desmond Bane fan. Like I've loved Desmond Bane for a long time. He's been one of my favorite players. He's the type of player I like, super additive, elite 3-point shooter, can play really good on-ball defense, off-ball defense, can cut, can finish, can do everything. He has
even self-create a little bit.
He can also self-create when he needs to as well. Basically can do everything, scale up, scale down. So the type of player that I love, he's not doing it. Like he's shooting 32% this year. This is the career 40% shooter on high volume. He's been injured on and off, dealing with some nagging stuff, a toe, some other soft tissue injuries. And this guy is not even playing anywhere near his level. And they're doing this with Jaren Jackson Jr. playing like this. Ja Morant, I think, still has upside here. We still have guys like Vince Williams Jr. coming back, Gigi Jackson potentially. Other guys are playing not out of their mind, but kind of within themselves, and we're seeing them do things that we think that they can do. When you get Desmond Bane coming back and playing at, I think, where he's capable of, a sub all-star level player, I don't know what you do with the Memphis Grizzlies. I don't know.
Yeah, and like if you look at his 2-year trajectory, I just made up a word. If you look at his 2-year trajectory at his absolute peak, I think both of us would have said he had all-star upside. If we were like after that second season of when he was elite, we would have been like, oh yeah, this guy can make an all-star easily. Just because he's had, been struggling through injuries, and he's had a down season, 1.25 seasons. I think that all-star upside is still there.
Absolutely.
He can just get healthy. He's 26 years old. They're a really scary team. And you're talking about, some meat still on the bone for this team. Ja Morant is turning the ball over as much as he ever has, which, okay, given how much he passes, maybe that's to be expected, but the turnover percentage can go down a little bit. He can be a little bit cleaner with the ball. And like I said a little bit earlier, he can put the ball in the basket better. I don't know how much better, but like he's such a good free throw shooter. There has to be more. I'm sorry, this can't just be the best he can be at shooting the ball from distance, with how athletic he is, getting to the rim. Look at all three levels. He's like below average in all three levels. He's 35th percentile at the rim, 53rd percentile in the mid-range, 17th percentile from three. There has to be more for this guy in terms of pure efficiency. I believe there is a little bit more there. So you give Desmond Bane remembering how to shoot, remembering how to play basketball, getting healthy, whatever you want to call it. And then Ja Morant, sharpens up the edges a little bit. They get Vince Williams back. They get Edey back if they ever need some more size. This is one of the best teams in the NBA, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump out the window with it, but to me, the West is stacked. The Grizzlies are the second best team in the West. I think health contingent, they're the second best team in the West. And I think like clearly, so I can't have Denver up there, until they make a deal for another shooter. Like it's effectively Jokic versus the entire Grizzlies team, which he makes it not respectable by
Can't
himself.
bet against Jokic.
but honestly, no, you can't have Denver. Dallas is the only other contender for that spot, in my opinion. Houston, I'm not buying in like that. Like maybe next year, maybe some more time. I'm just not buying in on them like that. Golden State, no. Minnesota, nah. Phoenix, if they're ever
Nah.
healthy, yeah, no, I'm out on Minnesota right now. Phoenix, if they're ever healthy, maybe. But I don't know. For me, it's OKC, and then it's Memphis, and then there's a tier break, and then maybe not a tier break. Maybe Dallas is right there, and then there's a tier break, and then there's the rest of the teams in the West.
And something first of all, we haven't said the name Jalen Wells yet, which we should. That guy's somehow, as a rookie, playable defensively and can shoot already.
Yeah.
Like he's just feeling like, I don't know if you can just get him out of the rotation. I don't know what they do when Vince Williams comes back. I don't like, I guess they just find a way. Taylor Jenkins is a good coach. He's a creative coach. These guys play for him. I believe in that stuff. I know you do too. He seems clever in terms of like drawing up plays. I trust him to do it. But we talk about them being one of the best teams in the West, and we haven't even mentioned the defense really. They're 7th in the NBA in defense. So like it's rare to have a team that plays at this pace, that's this level of offense, 4th in offense. I literally just said it on our last episode. If you're that good in offense, you don't have to be that good at defense, and teams adjust to you. Well, teams aren't really adjusting to the Memphis Grizzlies. They're letting them get what they want on offense, letting them play at the pace they want on offense, and then Memphis is still a top 7 defense in the league, which is remarkable. I want to point out one thing that I texted you a few days ago when we were talking about the Grizzlies, which I find incredible and I think is so cool. And I hope our listeners are intrigued by it, and it encourages them to go watch some more Grizzlies and focus in on this. Ja Morant's opponent grade per B-ball index has gone from an F his entire career, or like a D minus or an F, to a B plus. His defensive impact across the board is as high as it's ever been. And it seems like the Grizzlies are leaning on him more on that end. They're saying, dude, we're going to throw you into the fire. Are you up for the challenge? I think that's so cool that a guy that so much of the offense, so much of the initiation is reliant on him, a guy whose reputation as an all-star is predicated on being an offensive player. I think it's so cool that this guy has basically maybe asked or been tasked with defensive upside that nobody knew that he had, and at least in the short term, he's swimming and not sinking.
Yeah, I think I definitely think you look at that matchup difficulty, and he is taking on really difficult challenges that we haven't seen him do, years in the past, and that's because I think Bane typically would take on those really difficult matchups, and now a lot of that is going to Ja when you talk about kind of smaller guards and kind of staying in front of them. I do think, though, I think some of the defensive impact from Ja so far is a little, I don't necessarily buy it right now. I mean, we're seeing a huge disparity in terms of his defensive EPM, his impact by that metric versus his defensive LeBron. Like, we see him in defensive EPM at an 81st percentile defensive EPM, which is insane for him to have that kind of impact. But then we look at defensive LeBron, he's around the 13th or 14th percentile. So it's a huge disparity. To me, that's just a really high indicator that there's a lot of noise going on, and we can't really trust the defensive data, with such a tiny sample of games from Ja. But at the same time, I do think if you watch the games, you see him kind of really taking those challenges. He really digs in. It really matters to him. I see a little bit of a Russell Westbrook like kind of mentality there, where it's like, I'm going to lock this matchup up. And when he does dig in, he can be a very solid and effective perimeter defender, and a smart off-ball defender as well. So I do think there's something to it. I don't buy that he's like having this great defensive season or anything like that, but I think there's a ton to it in terms of from a mentality perspective, from a matchup perspective, and from if you need to get a stop, I do kind of trust Ja to be the head of the snake there defensively and to play the system correctly. So for sure, their defense has been just incredible.
And just to kind of sum this all up, to wrap this up, if you look at the team's on-off numbers, I don't think anything is more highlights more how good this team has been there are no bad lineup combinations. There's no bad on off numbers. Like if somebody has a negative swing, it's because the team was good with him on the court, but really good with them off the court. That doesn't really mean anything. That just means the team's really good regardless of who's out there. That doesn't say anything about that individual player. The worst rotation player's on-court net rating is +3 per 100 possession. The worst player in their rotation is winning their minutes by 3 points per 100 possessions, and then nobody's off-court number is worse than plus 2.8 per 100 possessions. Everybody's off-court number is better than that, which means they're literally winning every minute. They're not winning anybody. There's no minutes they're not winning right now. It's just insane. This team is so good. They're so fun to watch. And I hope if you're a Grizzlies fan out there, I hope you think we've done them justice so far for how surprising they've been and how good they've been. And if you're not a Grizzlies fan and you've made it this far, I hope we've encouraged you and inspired you to go watch some Grizzlies.
That's a great way to close it out. Go watch some Grizzlies. They are super fun. No matter what style of basketball you're into, you will enjoy the Grizzlies. And we'll see, again, as Ja we'll see how his shooting goes, and we'll see how Bane's health goes. And, if Jaren Jackson is able to keep this up, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for the Western Conference to compete with these guys. But for now, that's it for us for this week. For Geoff, I'm XJ, and this has been Hot Hand Theory.